So this story unsettles me every time. So Jesus has now crossed into Gentile territory. We know that because there are pigs there. And that detail matters because this was not a comfortable, clean religious setting. Jesus stepped into a place his own people considered unclean. Different land, different people, different customs, a completely different world. And there he meets a man who's been living among the tombs, not in a home or family, among the dead. And the Bible tells us that he was tormented, isolated, crying out, and cutting himself with stones. We don't know his full story. We don't know what happened before the demons took hold. Maybe he had lost someone, maybe he'd been wounded, maybe trauma had cracked something open in him. Maybe people had tried to help him at first and then got tired, frightened, or embarrassed, so we don't really know the whole story. But we're told enough to know that this man was not just difficult. He was suffering. He was tormented. He was trapped inside a life that no human being was designed to created to live. And everyone in that region had learned to survive around his pain. And they had chained him. They had avoided him. They knew where he was in the tombs. They knew what he'd become. But they didn't know how to restore him. And then Jesus appears. He did what no one else could do. He saw the man beneath the torment. He spoke to what was destroying him. He delivered him. He gave him his mind back, his dignity, his humanity, his future. And by the time the people came to see what happened, the man who had once been naked, violent, bleeding, and screaming was sitting there clothed and in his right mind. And you would think people would rejoice at that. You would think someone would say, "Oh my goodness, our brother is back." You would think someone would fall to their knees and thank God that this man was finally free. But that's not what happened. They looked at the healed man, but then they looked at their dead pigs, and then they asked Jesus to leave. That part is brutal because it reveals something so ugly. They were more disturbed by the loss of their livestock and their profit than the restoration of a human life. Their economy mattered more than his freedom. Their business mattered more than this man's healing. And they'd made peace having a tormented man living in the tombs, but they could not make peace with the cost of what Jesus had done to set him free. And before we judge those people too quickly, we need to ask ourselves, how often do we do the same thing? How often do we tolerate someone's suffering as long as they just stay somewhere over there? How often do communities adjust around broken people instead of making space for their restoration? And I'm talking about us as Christians. I'm not talking about the world. How often do systems prefer someone remains manageable rather than healed? Because healing is disruptive. Deliverance costs something. Restoration exposes what everyone else becomes comfortable ignoring. And Jesus didn't just disturb the demons that day. He disturbed the economy, the town, the quiet arrangement everyone had made with that one man's pain. And they chose the pigs. They chose normal. They chose profit. They chose familiar. They chose life before Jesus interfered. But the man in the tombs, he chose Jesus and wanted to go with him. And I understand why. Because everyone had treated him like a problem to be restrained and tied up and chained. And Jesus treated him like a person worth saving. When everyone else saw danger, Jesus saw a son. When everyone else saw ruin, Jesus saw someone who could be restored. And that is the kind of God we serve. He walks into unclean places. Hear me out. He walks into unclean places in our lives, in our hearts. He walks into tombs. He comes near the tormented. He's not afraid of the screaming, the bleeding, the brokenness, the cutting of self, or the mess. And he is willing to disrupt what people worship in order to rescue who they abandoned. So maybe the question is not, do we want Jesus to heal? Maybe the deeper question is, are we afraid that his healing might cost us something? Our comfort, our control, our image, our money, our version of normal. Because you got to remember, Jesus always values a person over a system. He always values a soul over the herd. He will always value restoration over respectability. And if that makes him inconvenient, maybe then we've finally met the real Jesus, not the safe one that we manage, the savage one who crosses the lake, steps into Gentile land, walks among the tomb, confronts hell itself and says, that man belongs to me.